Okay, so I am going to turn it over here to my next guest, Daryl Pritchard. Said that correctly, I hope. All right, from who I know, he didn't really know me, but I knew him from the Personalized Medicine Coalition, which AiArthritis is a member of. And as you know, if you tuned into the show, AiArthritis was at the Personalized Medicine Coalition conference in Dana Point just a couple weeks ago. So this is a continuation of that conversation and a lot of the lessons learned. And Daryl's going to be presenting on a session, and we wanted to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, a little introduction.
Thank you, Tiffany. And as you mentioned, I'm Daryl Pritchard, Senior Vice President for Science Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. Thank you for joining us and participating in the Personalized Medicine Conference a couple of weeks ago. I'm glad that you reached out and were able to have this conversation today to follow up on some of that. So the Personalized Medicine Coalition, for anybody who is unfamiliar, is an education and advocacy and evidence development organization based in Washington, D.C., with about 240 members of all different stakeholder types. We have industry, both pharmaceutical and diagnostic industry. We have healthcare providers, academic health centers, community health centers. We have patient groups. We have IT folks, the information management folks, a lot of public policy and legislation and advocacy members. And we even have a couple of payers, which is an important constituent, especially as we talk about access. We all come together with the shared mission to advance personalized medicine. And my role with the organization is really to help initiate programs and initiatives that develop evidence that show to all of those stakeholders that personalized medicine is a more successful and effective and efficient strategy for handling, responding to and providing treatment to different health conditions. So I'm very glad to be here to talk about arthritis and autoimmune disease today, because this, I think, is a frontier in personalized medicine for which we are very aware at the Personalized Medicine Coalition, and I think there's a lot coming.
Yes. I've been traveling all over the place. Went to the conference for personalized medicine in Dana Point, then turned around a few days later, left for Denmark for EULAR, and I landed last Monday and then took off again. So I've just been go, go, go. But at EULAR, I would say 80% of everything was about biomarkers, personal precision medicine, and we've seen it at the ACR, American College of Rheumatology, and at EULAR for about a year, 2 years, I'd say, just the basic science and starting, and now in clinical trials. And also just met someone from Dexterity, shout out, who's developed a testing tool for lupus. So the testing's there, and as we know, we're in this clinical phase where there's a lot of medicines being tested because our diseases are very individualized per the individual. And what happens is when our medications get to market, and these are very expensive treatments, and we're taking up a good hunk of the healthcare system pie where the money's being divvied out for these diseases, where there is onset typically in adults ages 20 to 40 and any age in children. So this is a long-term commitment because we rarely go into remission. But if you know which treatment to be on, and we can predict, we can get better access to treatment. And then the goal would be to show kind of health economists, hey, this is the way to go because we're a big community. 1 out of 10 people have our diseases. So you want to keep us working, you want to keep us in society, you want to really kind of lower that piece of the pie, then this is the way to go. So another reason why I'm really interested in hearing more from you, because that's what we're so passionate about. How do we prove with data that will influence access? And so why don't you just tell us a little bit more, because I know that's what the presentation tomorrow is a little bit about access and how we go from research to a clinical setting as well, correct?
It's exactly like you said. If we start with the big picture and think of all of the patients that are going to need sometimes very expensive therapies, it actually behooves us to make sure that those therapies, if they are expensive, work and they work well. So if we can tell what patients they won't work for and what patients they will work for, we can avoid a lot of costs and a lot of waste and a lot of progression of disease, which is a very important aspect of what's going on in autoimmunity. So in order to do that, we need diagnostic tests that will predict who will benefit from these expensive drugs and who will not. And that's where I think we're gonna focus. There are lots of tests that are being developed, and there's a regulatory pathway for getting those tests approved or cleared for use in a population of patients. That's one conversation. And then the second conversation is access after you do have these approvals or if they're laboratory developed tests where they are available to patients. How do we get access? And that's going to completely depend upon the providers and the payers who are going to pay both subscribe these medications and pay for those medications. So as you kind of led to, Tiffany, the key thing I think in the pipeline where we are now is developing that evidence that demonstrates to those two stakeholders in particular, providers and payers, that these things work, that these tests work to determine who the drugs are going to work for best. And that ultimately should provide better outcomes, less progression of disease, and lower costs because you're not wasting it on a trial and error type environment.
Absolutely. So knowing that kind of where we are in the process here, and cancer is a little farther along than others, kind of leading the way. And that is why AiArthritis and some other organizations in the autoimmune, autoinflammatory space are joining groups like Personalized Medicine Coalition, Biomarkers Coalition, because we want to be on the forefront and learn what those barriers and benefits are now so that we can join forces, help learn, and then when it's our turn, we can have our foot sort of in the door. So I just wanted to know if you could just talk a little bit more about what maybe the current biggest challenges that you see as far, and it doesn't have to be autoimmune, just cancer space, just the biggest barriers that we need to focus on to overcome. What can we do as patient organizations and as patients listening who, as our organization, and we're developing a data bank and doing real world evidence, et cetera. What can we do on our end?
No, I think you, again, are right on target. The patient's role in this progression of integration of these technologies into healthcare is the most important because ultimately all of these stakeholders are answering to the patient. We're all working towards getting the patient the best care. So what can the patient do? Well, two things in particular. Participate in research that demonstrate that is necessary in order to make sure that the diagnostics are valid, they do what they're saying. There's a number of different kinds of research projects. With diagnostic tests, not typically clinical trials. So you mentioned real-world evidence. There are practice-based tests where a doctor who may be involved in this type of research can say, we've got an experimental technology that you should consider being a part of because I think it'll work for you. Get involved in those things. Patients have a great deal more influence in this conversation than they actually think. And there's different kinds of patients. Some patients want to know exactly what all of their options are, and some patients just want to be told what is the best for me. It's those patients that want to do a little of the research and say, what are all my options? And talk to the physicians to find out what all the options are that are the most important here. Because that's what's driving the demand for this technology. And in lots of cases, and I don't mean to disparage providers at all, but in lots of cases, in the absence of the evidence to show that the technology is effective, they just put it aside and say, we're not going to use it until somebody else figures it out. Yep. But if their patients say, wait a minute, I want to know what is available. Oh, I see you're, within this healthcare institution, there's somebody working with this diagnostic test. Tell me more about that. It really influences providers more than anybody. Providers really do want to hear from their patients. Now, on the payer end, the patient has a different kind of influence. can't talk and demand sort of a treatment or an experimental treatment in the same way they can with providers, but they can say this is something that needs to be covered. This is something that that we as patients are interested in participating in and in moving forward. So you need to provide this care. And providers have to listen because ultimately their customer is the patient. So two things again, patients need to participate in the kind of research and they need to show their demand for personalized treatment. And part of that relies upon the education to the patient community that they can move forward. So I think that we're at a spot where education is moving forward. Patients who are interested in learning are finding out about things, and they are bringing that demand forward. And that's what's going to change the paradigm.
All right, we are speaking the same language. There is no doubt. So for all of you listening, of course, we're going to continue following up on this topic. It's enormous focus at AiArthritis. And just so you all listening know, if you are a person living with these diseases, again, let AiArthritis, people living with these diseases, as you know, if you tuned into the show, I also living with non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. That's a long name. You had that with my actual Tiffany Westridge Robertson, and it takes me like my whole elevator pitch to get through, right? So you all know that we have been very invested with, if you've gone with us to conferences, with our Go With Us program, we are invested in teaching you. If we learn, you learn. So we've done reports back from the conference I was at that we mentioned earlier. I'm doing reports back here, and we're here to help you learn. And also we do a lot of work in shared decision making and a group of this talk show called Roomy Round. So if you've listened to it, then you know that we talk to rheumatologists as equals at the table, and together we solve problems that impact education, advocacy, and research. And you better believe this topic's going to be on the table because as Daryl mentioned, the doctor has to be on board too. So we all really need to get in and start, and you can do it now. You can get involved. We have a lot of research that we're going to be doing in our own database, and the goal is to take this information and then use it to influence legislation access so when the time comes, we all can have the best quality of life possible. So I just want to thank you, Daryl.
Thank you, Tiffany. It's been my pleasure.
All right. Thank you all, and we will be tuning back in again soon.